What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. I'm joined today by a very special guest hailing from the Detroit Free Press, covering the Detroit Pistons, Omari Sankofa. What's going on, my guy? How are you doing this fine day?
Ethan, I'm great, man, and I appreciate you for having me on to talk about, of course, the head coach that we've both now covered, JB, and what's been a pretty active offseason for sure.
Yeah, Omar. I mean, I feel like there have been a lot of different wires being crossed when it comes to the Cavs and the Pistons. And I'm really happy that you are the first guest that we are having on for my tenure of this podcast. So thank you for being on with us today. So I want to get into your career first before we get into Detroit and the Cavs and those kinds of things. So when I'm reading on your bio and figuring out who you are and doing my research and my due diligence, you've covered the NBA and basketball for a while now. Not only covering the Detroit Pistons for the last 4 years, but also covering the Memphis Grizzlies and covering some college hoops. Can you walk us through your tenure and also what you've been able to do from your career to this point?
Yeah, so just working backwards, as you mentioned, I've been at the Free Press for the last 4 years, moved back home to cover the Pistons pretty much right when the pandemic hit in April 2020 or end of March, whenever it was. Before that, as you said, it was the Memphis Grizzlies for about a year and a half. I landed with the Athletic, and I covered basically the end of the grit and grind era. They traded Mike Conley the following offseason after I started, and they moved on from JB Bickerstaff. So I did follow JB that season. And that's when they brought in Zach Kleiman and Taylor Jenkins and drafted John Morant. So I covered basically from the beginning of the 2018 season to until the pandemic hit. So about a season and a half. And that was my first foray into the NBA. Previous to that, I was at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, and I covered Robert Morris hoops, but like a little bit of everything. I covered their men's and women's teams, but also did like some Division II, Division III football, some FCS football because they have Duquesne University. And I also helped out with some Pirates. I did Steelers here and there, Penn State. Like they had me do a little bit of everything. I even did some Penguins. So really, I was just sort of a jack of all trades there. And then I graduated Michigan State in 2016, student newspaper internships. But as far as professionally, I'm about 8 years in now, which is crazy.
I mean, first of all, congratulations on your career already. You seem like you are killing it, doing your thing. But when I look at your resume, is it true that you have a degree in psychology, even though you were a journalist personnel while you were at Michigan State?
Yeah, I do have a degree in psychology. So when I got to Michigan State, I was already pretty certain that I wanted to be a sports journalist. So I joined the student newspaper and like pretty much got started right away. I didn't start in sports though. I started off in features before I had to work my way into sports. But regardless, the upperclassmen would always complain about their journalism classes because they were doing far more with the state news than they were doing in their classes, right? Like over a semester, you might write 2 or 3 stories and they're being peer edited and whatnot. At the state news, we're producing 5 stories a week. Like we're working nights, we're working weekends. And I mean, the pace of it was comparable to what it would be at an actual newspaper. And you're balancing that on top of being a college student as well. So just from a time management standpoint, it takes up a lot of your day. Like I probably spent more time at the state news than in class. And I went to class, I got my degree, but but that's just what the newspaper demanded. So by the end of my freshman year, I kind of felt like if I have the experience, I probably won't need the degree. Like if they feel like they could major something else, then I might as well just switch. Because on top of that, like Grantland shut down while I was in college, and you don't know what the industry is going to look like in the future. Everybody was shifting to video, quote unquote, at that time, and now it's more podcast centric, as clearly we're doing one right now, and I've had my own podcast for the last couple of years. But I wanted to switch majors, and psychology just seemed like something that could launch me into doing something else. Like I was thinking maybe social work. Like I actually had a psychology internship that was adjacent to that. So like I was taking it pretty seriously, and I was just like, if this doesn't work out, then I'll just go to grad school and figure out the plan B. But ended up not needing the psychology degree. So, I guess if I could redo it, I probably would have did like political science or public policy or something like that. But yeah, I am a psychology major.
That's crazy to me because
Yeah,
one, you think about all the different things that people are doing while they're in school, right? And
yeah,
like obviously being a journalist, wanting to be a journalist from first stepping on campus, you understand that you have to get involved early on. And I don't want Omari to get himself off track. Like the man was the editor in chief of the state news at
only
a
for a
time,
summer.
so
Only
give
for a
him his
summer.
props on
It
that.
was
But
summer. ENC was not the same beast as
okay,
during the season, but I was ENC in 2014.
right. And then you also
Yeah.
were a basketball reporter for the state news as well. So
Hmm.
everything comes into line. And obviously, the psychology degree helps you out with personalities and meeting people and dealing with people that you have to talk to on a daily basis. Who knows?
Sure, sure. Let's go with that. Sure.
For sure.
Yeah.
But let's get into some of this information that you kind of briefly talked about when we're talking about the coaching hires and the changes going on, especially with the Pistons. This coming season will mark 3 straight years where you started the year with a new coach, as Dwayne Casey stepped down after the 2022-23 season, Monty Williams began the 2023-24 season, and now former Cavs head coach J.B. Bickerstaff will take the reins for the 2024-25 season. Before we get into the new coaching staff along with Bickerstaff, what has it been like to cover a team with countless changes, but also have to build new relationships with not only the head coach, but potentially the rest of the staff as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a whirlwind 3 years for sure. Really, it's been a whirlwind 4 years. So when I first took over the beat, that was when they hired Troy Weaver. So I started like 2 months before they hired Troy. So that was the initial front office change that the team underwent while I was there. And Dwayne Casey was still there from the previous regime, so there was some continuity there. So obviously from 2020 to 2022, it was all pretty steady. And then they go with, well, really from 2023, and then they go with Monty Williams, who's like the home run hire, and we're going to take this massive leap forward. Troy is still here. This is his fourth or fifth year as GM. And yeah, I think things just collapsed so thoroughly this past season. I mean, 14 wins, 28 game losing streak. Like obviously, it was a historically bad season on several fronts. Uh, like you can't recover from a season like that, I think, without undergoing some sort of change. Like something clearly went wrong last season. And, eventually they did end up with a new president in Trajan Langdon and now another new head coach in JB Bickerstaff. And it's just been a lot. Like it has been a lot. Like I think we're recording this on January 23rd. Like I don't think it's been 5 weeks since they fired Monty Williams. And like in that span, uh, there's just been so much change with the team that it's almost been a condensed off season. So like this time last year, you're like, okay, like they hired Monty, they signed him to the historic deal. It looks like they're going to be in some level of steadiness for the next few years as they try to just incrementally improve with a new coach and the staff locked in. And obviously that didn't happen. So it's just funny because JB's a coach I obviously previously covered with the Memphis Grizzlies. So even though that there's some new front office staff that I'm still getting to know, I'm already familiar with the head coach. So, it's just kind of funny in that sense that there's the coaching pool is wide enough that you probably don't cover the same coach twice pretty often. And I've ended up doing it here. So it's just kind of funny to me.
Now, I mean, it's always great to see a familiar face, right? I bet JB, when you guys had the introductory, was like, "Hey, I kind of remember you." Like,
Yeah.
yeah, that's always good to have in a room where you're going into a new situation. But
Mhm.
speaking of new people and new situations, Detroit also brought in a new leader as Trajan Langdon was named
Mhm.
president of basketball operations. It was being reported that Langdon and Monty Williams were having conversations before the quote unquote surprise dismissal of Williams. What happened from your perspective with that situation? Because we know Monty had a lot going on his plate in his personal life this past year as well.
Yeah, I think there was some talk of Monty coming back for a year or two. One thing to keep in mind is that Trajan took over the job like really at the very beginning of June. And one of his first initial decisions was, do we keep Monty or do we move on? I think they parted ways with Troy pretty quickly. Like it was within the first week. Like I think it was pretty mutual. Like it's just best if both sides move on. But I think there was some serious thought and conversation to giving Monty a year two, because not only like sometimes you just have a bad first year, right? But now you have some continuity, like the guys, and there's always the chance that it gets better, and you could essentially use the next season as an evaluation point. And and that's why I think the Monty decision didn't come until really about a week before the draft, because I think they really sort of thoroughly had those talks. And ultimately, I just think ownership said, Trajan, like, you're in charge, you're in control, but we had a year of this and it didn't work. So the other thing to keep in mind too is that because Trajan came in so late, like, you did have to hire staff and get all these people in place essentially before free agency. So you try to take on the task of fleshing out a front office, hiring an entirely new coaching staff after firing a coach. Like, you have the draft in that span. You're trying to do that in 4 weeks, and that's just the route that they went with. They were like, okay, we'll just move on from Monty. We'll get in a new head coach, and we're just going to, hire all these people and get everything together within a month. And essentially, that's what they've done.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the continuity, right? Like,
Yeah.
there's relationships that need to be built within these guys. Like Monty Williams being there for a year, having kind of like you said, a home run contract. I feel bad, but I don't necessarily feel bad. Obviously, you feel bad for Monty for the personal stuff that he got going on in his life, but he left the Phoenix Suns or got fired from the Phoenix Suns, still getting paid. Got fired by the Detroit Pistons, still getting paid. Like, it feels like a situation where if anything would have gone wrong, this is the way you would have wanted it, because now you not only are getting paid, but you have time to take a chance to step away if you want to, and then go and handle your business outside of that as well. So I think that's definitely an interesting point of view when it comes to that. But do you think that Monty is going to want to coach this next season, or do you think he's going to want to just take a step away?
I mean, it's tough to speculate. When the Pistons initially reached out to him last summer, that was his plan, was just to take a year off, spend time with family. His wife was having some health issues, which I think she's recovered from now, which is good. But he was dealing with some stuff in his personal life, and he was just like, I'm going to take some time off. So he initially gave the Pistons a rebuttal before they came back, and then obviously, the the salary got to astronomical levels, and he did end up coming back, but there was an initial no. So I can't speak on Monty's behalf. I don't know what he's planning on doing, but he did initially say no last summer, and the Pistons respected that, and they had a different process, and they had 2 or 3 front runners toward the end, including Charles Lee, who's now with the Charlotte Hornets, and then Kevin Ollie, who ended up being an assistant with the Brooklyn Nets last season. But with all of that said, Monty did initially want to take that time off last year, before Tom came back with the Godfather offer, essentially. And now he's in the same boat to essentially take time off or get back into the chair. I don't know if there's any coach vacancies even open at this point. Since the Pistons filled theirs, I've been tapped out of a lot of the coach stuff, beyond which assistants they're going to get. But he does have an opportunity to do what he was initially going to do. So, we'll just see. Like, I heard some murmurs that, there was some interest with the Lakers, which obviously they end up going a different way with JJ Redick. So I'm curious to see myself.
Yeah, and I mean, it's definitely going to be interesting, but I don't think there's going to be a Godfather offer for Monty this offseason for him to kind of dispute. But there is a new guy, a new sheriff in town for you guys. Our old coach in the Cavs organization, J.E. Bickerstaff, who led the Cavs to 99 wins over the last 2 seasons and is known for bringing the Cavs back into contention after they had just 19 wins in the 2019-2020 season when he joined the Cavs as an associate head coach. And then he took over as head coach that same year, coaching just the last 11 games of the regular season and winning 5. What has been the sense around the Pistons organization, whether players or higher ups, about adding Bickerstaff as the next head coach for the Pistons?
I think there's some optimism. I think after you have the season like you came off of last year, there's a willingness from everybody to like move on and set a new tone and a new standard. I think JB is a more energetic voice than the team has had in a while. I think the belief from Trajan in the front office is that seeing what he did in Cleveland, where you develop young guys like Isaac Okoro and Evan Mobley and Darius Garland, and you just mentioned the success they had over the last 2 years. They made the second round last summer. Probably would have this year if they didn't have the injury issues that they had. But I think that's a different conversation. But I think there's some optimism now that you brought in a head coach that recently accomplished right next door to you, which you've been trying to get off the ground really for the last 5 or 6 seasons. So, I mean, again, like, people who are listening to this pod and know JB, he's going to come in. He's really going to, motivate guys, put them in positions to, succeed early. And if he can be that like type of floor raiser, then I think people would be pretty satisfied given what happened last season. Like, you want to see progress at this point. Like, you can't get worse for the third year in a row. Like, things have been going backwards, so you need to start to see things move forward. So the hope is that JB's energy could come in and inject the franchise with what it needs.
Especially when you're coming off like the worst record in the league, right? Like it's not like you are at the bottom of the barrel. You can only go up, right? J.D. Bickerstaff
You would
was
think,
once
yeah.
at that point with the Cavs, basically, and understanding that like he led the team to a play-in the first round in the Eastern Conference semifinals, which the Cavs are not made without LeBron James since 1993. I don't know if you knew that, but like the Cavs without LeBron James had not won, gotten to the Eastern Conference Finals, Eastern Conference semifinals since 1993, and with LeBron James, it's been 2018. So it's still been a while, but being able to take that projected trajectory, that's definitely something to look forward to for the Pistons, especially when you talk about bringing in a new voice. And speaking of new voices, Bickerstaff is also bringing some of his coaching staff with him from Cleveland. Former Lakers head coach Luke Walton and Sidney Lowe, who was an assistant coach in Detroit before joining Bickerstaff's staff for 3 years. Adding these coaches who are also were a part of the rebuild could also help create a new culture in Detroit. But it helps to create a culture when you have a solid base, right? We talked a little bit about continuity earlier on, and the Pistons extended Cade Cunningham on a rookie max contract, added Tobias Harris, added Malik Beasley, claimed Paul Reed off free agency waivers, and re-signed Simone Fontecchio. What do you think about these signings and what it means for the Pistons and how they can grow, especially with a new head coach?
Yeah, one of the first things Trajan said when he came in was just the need to get veterans in who could just raise the floor for this team and create a level of competition that they just didn't have last season. And he also talked about the importance of shooting. So you look at that, and then you look at Tobias Harris. They re-signed Simone Fontecchio, who they got at the trade deadline, and played pretty well for him. I think he only played 16 games after the deadline, but he was very comfortably one of Detroit's best players in that span. Malik Beasley, a veteran shooter. You trade for Tim Hardaway Jr., a veteran shooter. So he went on and did exactly what he said he was going to do as far as that. And I mean, this team struggled to shoot the last few seasons. I think the lack of spacing really showed with Cade early last season with his turnovers. And he got better as the year went on. I think their spacing improved a little bit as the year went on too. They had Mike Muscala for a little bit. I mentioned Fontecchio. They were able to get some shooting as the season went on. But overall, those are the types of players who should open the floor for Cade. Players who just have the know-how, to win. They've all been in. I guess besides Fontecchio, but this is only his third or fourth season. But the other three guys have all been in winning environments, and they know what it takes. So, kind of like with JB, like you just really want to raise the floor for this team, right? Like you have to have this team be competitive every single night. It can't be another year of, long losing streaks, like sub 20 wins. I don't think they've won more than 23 since 2019. It's just been a very long stretch of just being bad. So you just need to just sort of get that out and upgrade the studs essentially, and that's what that was aiming to do. And we'll see how much it works out. But they certainly have more experience and more shooting than they did at this time last year.
Do you think this is the best roster that the Pistons have had since you've covered the team?
I would say so. Like again, like I haven't covered a team that's won more than 23 games. So it's not a super high bar to clear. But I think Cade Cunningham, had a very strong season last year. He should come back better, surrounded with better weapons. I think the amount of veteran shooting they have certainly exceeds what they've had in past seasons. A lot of it's going to hinge really on Jalen Duren and his development as a rim protector, because that's one thing that they've lacked really in the last 5 years, and you just can't win in today's league without that. JP's coming from a situation where he had two starting to, essentially, well, Isaiah Stewart, I think, is a pretty solid defender, but you haven't really had that type of rim protection in your front court. So a lot of it's going to hinge on that, but otherwise, I would say this probably is at least the most talented team over the last 5 years for sure.
And then mentioning Kate Cunningham, right? He signed the rookie max extension, 5 years, 224 million, which could plateau or go up to 269 million, right? Like it's a whole lot of money for a young
Yeah.
guy, young kid still trying to figure out his way in the league. Kate Cunningham, at this point in his career, did you like? I feel like the four guys that got them, right? Scotty Barnes, Kate Cunningham, Evan Mobley with the Cavs, and Franz Wagner with Orlando Magic. Those guys were like, you had a feeling that they could get a rookie max extension. Was that already kind of known going into this offseason that Cade was going to get a major extension?
Yeah, I think that was the feeling coming into the offseason. Again, I think he averaged 22 points, 7.5 assists, shot 45% overall, around 36 from three, on a team that otherwise really didn't support him with the shooting and defense he needed to drive. It was a leap forward for him in every capacity. And he got better as the year went on. Like, really, you shave off you have to, keep in mind he missed most of his sophomore season after undergoing shin surgery. So his first 20 games, he was turning the ball over like crazy. Couldn't get a shot to fall. Over his last, I guess he played around 66, 68 games last year. Like you shave off those first 20 when he was still getting his legs under him. He like those numbers look a lot better. Like I think he was shooting closer to like 38% from three over the last 2/3 of the season, which I think is a good omen for next year. So yeah, I think coming into this offseason, I was pretty high on Trajan's checklist, right? Like we need to get this guy under team control. Yeah, like 5 years, 224 is a lot of money, but in today's NBA economy, it's really not, especially with the way the cap's going to increase over the next 4, 5, 6 years. Cade, like his numbers do compare pretty favorably to what Paolo Banchero did last season, on a much worse team. So, I think K is absolutely a guy you had to lock down, and that was one of the top priorities for Trajan coming in.
What do you think is like the ceiling for Cade? Because like when you talk about Evan Mobley as the guy who also got a rookie max extension most recently, he's the guy that they think could be a defensive player of the year caliber guy. Could potentially, if the offensive game kicks in, he could be an MVP candidate kind of guy. Do you think that Cade Cunningham has that kind of MVP caliber? Is that the expectation that the Pistons have for him?
I don't think they've set any sort of expectation. I think the thing with that is like, yeah, you would love a guy to become like a Jokic, Giannis, LeBron, Curry level NBA player, but like that's just the absolute elite of the elite, and most guys don't become that. But could Cade become maybe like a Anthony Edwards level player? Like I think so. Is his upper outcome potentially like a Jason Tatum or Jalen Brown, where you're just elite on both ends of the floor? Like I think he has that capability. I don't know where you would rank him. I guess like 1 through 20, like when he reaches his peak. But I think he can be one of the best players on a really good team. Is he the number one alpha dog? I think that's something you just have. Like you don't know till you see it, right? Like I think even like a lot of guys, there's been questions of do you have that type of upside, and you don't know until they actually show it. But do I think K could be a John Morant level guy? Like I definitely do. Absolutely, he can lead a good team. It's just can you get to that next tier, and you never know that until a guy actually gets there.
You mentioned the defense aspect of the Pistons, right? And obviously, you guys had a guy like Amen Thompson who came into the league kind of rough, and understanding that he got mixed minutes. Like in the beginning of the season, he was getting some minutes, and then he got taken out from the starting lineup a couple times. But now with J.U. Bickerstaff coming over and knowing that he's more of a defensive-minded coach and Amen Thompson is more of a defensive-minded guy, how do you think that those two are going to mesh, and how could you see a men's role kind of developing under JB, also with the new veterans that they have around him?
Yeah, I mean, JB, he's a guy that did really good work with Isaac Okoro, with him developing an outside jumper, and he came in with a defensive reputation. They have Asar, they have Asar is the twin they have in Detroit, but Asar came in. He was a really solid defender from day one. I think he showed some upside as a playmaker. He's just such an elite jumper. He was really effective on lobs and just in transition around the rim in general. But the outside shot is, I mean, at this point in his career, he's essentially a non-shooter. I think he shot 18%, and he took 100 more than 100 threes over the season, and like nobody who took at least that many threes shot that low of a percentage last season. So does he ever figure the shot aspect out? Like I don't know. Like we've seen players become good shooters after not being good shooters early on, but again, I think that's something you don't know until you actually see it. But just off his defense and athleticism alone, I think he's somebody that'll factor into JB's rotation, like especially given how Isaac Okoro carved out a role over his career.
You mentioned Isaac, and obviously Isaac's on a restricted free agent contract right now, and he's trying to figure out if he's going to sign the qualifying offer with the Cavs or if he's going to test the waters elsewhere. And the Cavs have obviously been like, since he hasn't accepted it, he's kind of testing the waters and see where he can be more value when it comes to the paycheck at the end of the day. Have you heard any murmurs of the Detroit Pistons wanting to get a hold of Isaac Okoro, especially with how his relationship holds with JB Bickerstaff?
No, I haven't heard anything as far as that. The Pistons only have one open roster spot. They've invested a lot in the wings. I would think if they bring in anybody, it would be another ball handler to take some of that pressure off Cade. But I haven't heard anything there as far as that.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Sometimes you just gotta ask the questions that the fans want to know for
Hey,
a
you never
change.
know.
But
Yeah.
but we talked a lot about the individual players. But as this team has come together for the roster positioning, do you think that they could contend for a play-in spot this coming year, or are they still too early in this rebuild to think that far ahead?
Yeah, I think it's too early. Like they won 14 games. They'd have to at minimum like 2.5 times that, if not triple, be in the 500 win range to really be in the play in conversation like that 7 through 10 range. So I think for a team that would improve just by cracking 20 wins, like they're probably still 2 years off from really entering that conversation. Like, do I think if everything clicks right, they could get to that point? I do, but again, they won 14 games last year, so I don't know if I'm comfortable predicting a 25 game improvement quite yet.
I think that's also very fair.
Yeah.
But we've seen the Eastern Conference got a lot stronger, tougher this offseason. Mikal Bridges heads to the Knicks. Paul George going to the Philly. Orlando adding Kentavious Caldwell Pope. ESPN recently ranked the NBA teams based on the moves they've already made this offseason, and 6 of the top 10 teams were Eastern Conference teams. There's always been this argument that the West is tougher than the East. Do you think that that statement is still true? Because to me, it feels pretty even as of right now, especially when you look at the last 6 championships of the league have been split between the two conferences.
I think the West is deeper. I think you look at the Western Conference, like even without the Memphis Grizzlies, who were fringe contender the season before and just had terrible injury luck, but they're healthy. They'll be back in the fold next season. I think if you look at the top 6 in the East compared to the West, it's pretty comparable. I think if you compare like the 7 through 10 range in both teams, the West is significantly stronger than the East. But you look at that, and like there's some East teams that got better. I think this offseason that could potentially make some noise in that category. But to me, I think the West typically has the stronger teams if you look at the entire playoff run. So we'll just have to see. Like there's teams like the Lakers, Clippers, like do they still have another move awaiting that could push them over the top? I think there's a lot of West teams that are one move away from potentially really contending.
All right, Omari, we're almost ready to wrap up this podcast. Is there anything that you think that Detroit fans or Cavs fans should know heading into this next season that we did not talk about this far?
Man, I would just say, I think if everything clicks right, they could be a fun team to watch. You have, some really athletic guys and Duran, Ivy, Asar. Like Asar has some, ridiculous dunks last season. I think he's a guy that's a highlight reel waiting to happen. And then you add Ron Holland to that, who I thought really came on strong toward the end of summer league. And again, that's another really athletic guy. And K is also fun to watch too. So just assuming health, assuming that their baseline gets to the point to where they need it to be, they could potentially be like what the Orlando Magic were a couple of years ago, where it was like, okay, they have a lot of talented young guys, and this is going to be a good playoff team in a couple of years. So we'll see. There's still a lot to project, but I could absolutely see this team being very watchable and more competitive than they've been in the last 5 years.
Do I have to wait till the Cavs play the Pistons this season, or am I going to see you at NABJ in Chicago?
I'm not going to be an NABJ, unfortunately. I like to use my off season just to I travel so much. Like when it gets to that point, I'm just like I'd rather just sleep in my own bed for a good month. But we have some mutual friends who will be down there, and I'm looking forward to seeing all the photos on Instagram in a couple of weeks.
Disappointing, but I will catch you whenever the Cavs play the Pistons this coming season. Omari from the Detroit Free Press, thank you for joining me today. This was a great conversation. I appreciate you being our first guest in my tenure of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But with all that being said, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs insider, interact with Chris and me by subscribing to Subtext. Sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word stop. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me and Chris. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.